Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm going to be talking about episode 5 of Ultimate Spider-Man called, I kid you not, Flight of the Iron Spider. I really wish there was some booze in that. Okay, let's get it out up front. I was not terribly pleased with this episode. In fact, I think I could easily call it the weakest one that we've seen out of the season so far. But let's start things out on a generally positive note. We have our very first major Marvel Universe character guest star, and that is, of course, the one and only the Invincible Iron Man, played by Adrian Pasdar, who most people know as Nathan on Heroes. Of course, he was also the voice of Tony Stark in the English dub of the Iron Man anime. And while that series was not exactly the greatest Iron Man story ever, I certainly have to give Pasdar a lot of respect. He really brought Tony Stark. After Robert Downey Jr., let me just put it that way. After Robert Downey Jr., it's him that I'm going to be thinking of as being Tony Stark from now on, since I've seen that. He really does capture Tony's essence wonderfully, and I'm perfectly cool with him continuing to voice Tony in future animation projects. So anyway, we have the team throwing down with Living Laser, one of Iron Man's classic enemies. He gets an update here in the show. Living Laser is somebody who I only really vaguely remember from the comics. I'm pretty sure he looks reasonably different here, but it's not a bad look for him. And we get to see a few other villains with their very classic 60s comic book costumes. Sadly, I'm really not well versed enough in the Silver Age of Marvel to really pick out who those guys were. I'm fairly sure they were Iron Man villains, though. So, if you know, point it out. Please let me know in the comments. I would appreciate that. But I am fairly sure they were actual Iron Man villains, and I think the Melter might have been one of them. And I did think that they looked pretty good. And I do appreciate the fact that they did stay true to the classic look from the comics, even if it did end up making them look a little goofy. But anyway, one thing that I did like was that they did do a riff on the relationship that Tony and Peter Parker did develop around the time of the Civil War story. Tony sort of took Peter under his wing, became kind of a mentor to him, and working with Tony Stark was really kind of a dream come true. Here he was working with somebody who not only appreciated his scientific mind, but was also his buddy as a superhero. And of course, we get to see the Iron Spider costume that Joe Quesada, the current editor-in-chief at Marvel Comics, cooked up for the time when Peter Parker was very much on Tony's side in things during that big conflict in the Marvel Universe in the comics. The Iron Spider costume, I think, it was good for what it was. I mean, none of us who were reading the comics really had any expectation that this was going to stick around for a terribly long time. It did the job, and it was a good design. So, but beyond that, it's sort of nothing more than a nice unlockable alternate costume for Spider-Man and Spider-Man video games. Here, I think that they did okay with the Iron Man armor. I like the fact, the Iron Spider armor, that Peter really kind of sucked at using it. While in the comics, he did have a few gaffes here and there, but more or less he used the Iron Spider costume fairly well. And I think that is sort of just a nice reflection of just how different adult Peter and teenage Peter are. So let's talk about a few of the other little things that I considered positives. The part where Spider-Man was dancing with the robot. I'm fairly sure that robot was intended to be a bit of a shout out to the RoboCop movies. It certainly did look like that big machine gunny thing that was the main enemy, if I remember right, in RoboCop 2. Sorry, it's been a long time since I've seen the RoboCop movies, and really, why would you want to watch any RoboCop movie besides the original RoboCop? But anyway, that was that was fun, and I did enjoy the sort of little alternate reality things. We had an appearance by of all people the spectacular Spider Ham, who I think in the comics ended up being turned into a zombie. Yeah, comics are like that sometimes, folks. And we had the alternate reality from the Marvel Superhero Squad show. I think that's what it was. You'll have to forgive me. I never really watched that show, but I definitely recognize the style of design. So anyway, that was that. I thought that was a nice touch. I always love the alternate realities that they have at Marvel, and I love the way they handle alternate realities in the Marvel universe. I think they do it better than anybody else in comics. So let's talk about oh yeah, there was some when we said something about fantasies that were going on in Peter's head. We got some more. We got references to stuff that seemed very clear out of video games, things like Marvel versus Capcom, and what sounded suspiciously like the sound that you get when Mario collects coins in the Super Mario Brothers games. As much as the somewhat juvenile humor of the show, and this being a kid show, it's not inappropriate. I won't lie to say that I did get a big kick out of that. So anyway, let's talk about what I would consider to be the main theme of this episode. Yeah, we're going to talk about things like theme. Bet you never thought that hearing your English teacher talk about that would ever come in handy. But handy it is. And the theme of this episode, I think, is hero worship. Now, naturally, Peter is going to admire someone like Tony Stark. And look at his situation. He also admires Nick Fury, but Nick Fury is always on his case. He's always telling Peter what he's doing wrong. He never really gives Peter much in the way of praise. And then Iron Man comes along, someone who Peter is hugely admires, and pretty much right off the bat, Iron Man says, like, kid, you know what? You're rough around the edges, but I like you. Why don't you come hang out with me? And I'll teach you some stuff. I mean, this is literally like a dream come true for Peter. And even better, Tony goes and he gives him this really awesome suit of armor. He's basically kind of made Peter Iron Man Jr. in a way. He's oddly enough, I'm reminded of Incrediboy from the Incredibles. Yeah, we all saw how well that turned out, didn't we? But anyways, so yeah, Peter is as it was put, having a big man crush on Tony, and he lets this blind him to the fact that Tony's not perfect. Tony does make mistakes, and maybe entrusting this power, this technology to him might have been one of those mistakes, because Peter clearly doesn't know how to control it properly. Tony doesn't really do much in the way of giving him any training in this. And I mean, stop and think about that for a second. You're handing someone you barely know this incredible power, and while Peter is, a good guy at heart, he just doesn't know how to use it properly, and that puts him and other people at risk, as we see quite clearly in the show. For all his good intentions, Tony was incredibly irresponsible to do what he did. And to make it even worse, Peter is so blinded by his admiration for Tony that he ends up alienating the rest of the Amazing Friends. Yes, I'm going to continue to call them that. And that's actually sad, because by the end of it all, we've seen that the bonds between them have started to form. The guys on the team, even to a small degree Nova, are hurt by this. They're upset that Peter has chosen someone he barely knows over them. And none of this is ever explicitly said. We don't need to have Peter stand up on a soapbox and say, I was wrong and this is how I was wrong. I mean, he does admit to his fault. And he says, you know what, this is my mistake and I'm going to try and make it right. And I don't expect you guys to come with me to help me. But of course, the Amazing Friends, being true heroes and increasingly honest friends, of course, they go along with Peter, and they're able to help him save Iron Man, turn the tide. The good guys win. Yay. And that's all well and good. I really did enjoy that scene where Peter is contrite and is apologizing to them. There was, I think, the way that scene was written, some genuine feelings of friendship. So I will give the show credit for that. I also have to give the show credit for the way they're handling Iron Fist. The White Tiger, I think, is the character who obviously has the most probably the most common sense and is obviously the more intellectual person. Iron Fist, though, Danny, I think he's the person who has the most real wisdom, and he's very good at doling that out. I liked his advice to Peter about how he needed to walk his own path, and this is so true for people in real life. Just like in ancient Greece, how at the Oracle of Delphi they had inscribed upon one of the gates that led to the Oracle, "To thine own self be true." At least, however that is. No, wait, that was from Shakespeare, wasn't it? Okay, either I'm remembering stuff wrong or the History Channel has lied to me. It's probably the former. But anyway, I'm getting off track. What Iron Fist says about following your own path is very true. I want you to go down, like, imagine look at any group of high school kids, any large group of high school kids, and I guarantee you will see some of them whose look and whose attitude is based on somebody they've seen on TV. And even when I was in high school, I never understood this. So my feeling on this was like, okay, so let me get this straight. You're going to express yourself as an individual by trying to look, act, and talk as much as like some rapper that you see on MTV as humanly possible. But this was back when they actually still occasionally played music on MTV. Yes, children, there really was such a fabled day in time. And, here we see that with Peter. He's basically trying to be Iron Man. And Peter Parker is not Tony Stark. You cannot succeed at being someone else, no matter how hard you try. We're all stuck, for good or for ill, only being able to be ourselves. Now, we can change who we are as people, but we can never, ever be anyone else. All of this has to come from within us. So let me see, what else? So let's talk about some of the stuff that I didn't like real quick. First of all, the whole thing with the Disruptor. Okay, that just hugely telegraphed exactly how this was going to end right from the moment it ended, from the moment we saw it. I mean, not that predictable is necessarily bad, but when you drop something that obvious in my lap, you just ruin any and all tension. Because it's going to be, okay, at some point they're going to trick Living Laser into running into the Disruptor, and then they're going to scatter him across dimensions, and that's how the good guys are going to win the day. And I'm sorry, that just makes things boring. There is no real tension there. I said it before, I'm going to say it again. So let me see, what else? Okay, well, folks, I think that covers everything I really had to say about this episode. Again, I don't really feel that this is the strongest episode of the season so far. And while I did have some good character moments, the voice acting was nice, and there was certainly some nice animation. This was just a little bit too much stuff going on that was cliche, and yeah. Overall, I just felt that this was a fairly weak episode. I still have decent hopes for this series as a whole, but here's hoping next week's episode is better. Until next time, please comment, rate, and subscribe, and remember that you can follow me on Twitter @HoosierJedi. Until next time, see you guys, and have a good one.